Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. For almost 200 years, Americans have generally been stuck with two political choices, either Democrat or Republican. But can that ever change? Let's get to the bottom line. American politics is mostly a zero-sum game. Instead of debate on how to move the country forward, Democrats and Republicans both believe that their way is the only way, and everyone else is sort of the enemy. Instead of civil debate, we see a lot of threats and trench warfare. And as American political institutions deteriorate and become more and more toxic, citizens have also become more polarized. The country is full of small parties offering a third way, but none have really taken off the ground. So is there any way to make American politics more representative, more responsive, more diverse, and more stable? Today we're talking with Lee Drutman, Senior Fellow in the Political Reform Program at the New America Foundation and author of Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, the Case for Multiparty Democracy in America, and also Holly Page, one of the co-founders of No Labels, a fairly new political organization that supports a centrist approach that's really not exactly Republican nor Democrat. It's wonderful to have you both here. I think one of the big challenges in this country, Lee, if I can start with you, is to ask this question about the solvency of the choices we have. We have now, I don't know if he's going to win the GOP nomination, but the front runner, Donald Trump, is now facing federal charges, a very unusual moment. On the Democratic ticket, a lot of people are looking at Joe Biden and saying this is the oldest person to ever run for office or to run again for office in our history. And they're asking the question, are these the only two choices we've got? I'd love to get your take on the choices and why we're stuck with these two, possibly.
Well, it is a extremely unusual situation in our political history to have two candidates for president who are likely candidates who are both extremely unpopular and have a large share of Americans who say that they don't really want either of these candidates. So I understand the reasons why many Americans wish there were more choices, and I also wish there were more choices. But the presidency of our political institutions is the most winner-take-all, and there can only be one president. So it does tend towards these two candidates. I think what the failures of our two-party system to generate better choices it seems quite clear to me. But the question I think that we all are trying to figure out is, what do we do about that? And to me, we have to start with our electoral system, which means that we really need to think about ways that we can elect more candidates across a wide range of institutions who represent more parties. I think the challenge is that the presidency and the binary choice that we are facing in this election is a symptom of some deeper problems within our political system. But it's hard to address the symptoms, but we can address the core problems.
So how do you do it, Lee? Because if I were a young person today in a, say, conservative oil town like Bartlesville, Oklahoma, north of Tulsa, I might have some similar views as people growing up in the Bay Area in San Francisco, might have some similar views with someone down in Mobile, Alabama. But I also have issues that are different, and I have different orientation, maybe different sets of ideas about how an economy works. What is preventing that impulse of trying to aggregate some of those interests around our little, Bartlesville, Oklahoma young person and have that eventually become a party or something with some political juice in the U.S. political system? Is that something that your vision of an alternative to the two-party system would entertain?
Yeah, absolutely. So Oklahoma is a very red state in terms of who gets elected, but in terms of who the people are in Oklahoma, I think there is a lot more ideological diversity that's not well represented. So you have a system of elections for both the congressional delegation and the state legislature that relies on single-member districts. And in a single-member district, you can have only one winner. And single-member districts mean that third parties are treated as spoilers and wasted votes. But if you move to a system of multi-member districts in which votes are allocated proportionally by party support, which is the norm among democracies around the world, that creates opportunities for new parties to form and new parties to organize. And so under a system of proportional representation, if what you're talking about is a more moderate Republican Party, that could be a party that gets 20% of the votes statewide, but it's not going to get 51% in any single district, so that there's not going to be a real reason for people to form that party. And that's why such a party doesn't form, because in our system of single winner districts, third parties are wasted votes. If we move to a system of more proportional representation with multi-member districts, you would see more parties forming.
Holly, you were co-founder of No Labels, this interesting new organization that's trying to posit that we should have choices that are neither Republican nor Democrat, maybe something in between, a kind of pragmatic party. What are you trying to do with No Labels? And is that part of the answer here, as we talked to Lee, about trying to think beyond the stranglehold that the Democrats and Republicans have on the current system?
Absolutely. First of all, No Labels was founded in 2010, so we have been around for a while. And what we are really doing is giving voice to what we call the common sense majority. Millions and millions, we have our numbers about 77 million American voters who do not see their values and hopes and dreams for the country and their families reflected in what the two parties are selling currently. So we are less committed to forming a third party. We would like to see both parties kind of modernize and reform and speak more to the vast majority of American voters.
Well, so how do you do that? How do you, I guess the question is, how do you not become a Trojan horse for one of the two parties and still provide a real viable alternative?
Well, we have a tremendous track record working through our allies in the House, in the Problem Solvers Caucus, and in the Senate.
So tell us about the Problem Solvers Caucus.
So the Problem Solvers Caucus is a robust caucus of the United States House of Representatives, co-chaired by Democrat Josh Gottheimer and Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, 64 members. They have several rules, one of which is if 75% of the caucus supports a piece of legislation, the entire caucus has to vote for it. That they vote as a block, and they were absolutely instrumental in reaching the debt ceiling deal. And I think any sort of constructive movement in Congress, they will be at the center of it. But we have a track record. Our folks working together helped create and then pass the hard infrastructure legislation. By having an alliance with the Senate, they found a path forward, and that is why you had so much bipartisan legislation passed last Congress. The CHIPS Act, Electoral Reform Act, Great American Outdoors, that was all them. So we know this can work if you allow elected officials who are committed to problem solving the space and the ability to talk with the other side and come up with the best collective solution.
So I want to jump back to Lee, but before doing that, I know from public record that you've raised an awful lot of money to potentially put forward a candidate in 2024 in the race. Joe Manchin has often talked about. Larry Hogan, who is a Republican leader of Maryland, who has said he's not going to run, but nonetheless, I'm just wondering, are you going to spend all the money you raised in 2024, and who do you think it might be?
Well, this is a little bit different than almost any other conversation in Washington, Steve, because this is really not about the elected officials. I think we're all exhausted by the idea that we're going to elect this one or that one, and magically it's all going to be good from then on out. This is about giving 77 million American voters a voice in the national conversation. We want all the elected officials to speak to us. And by the way, all we want is what's in our collective best interest: fiscal responsibility, a 21st century education program. I mean, things that are very general, but that the country needs to compete in the future.
Well, thank you. Lee, I'd love to hear from you about what you think about the chances of No Labels breaking through. But I also want to hear from you about structurally, because you've written a lot about fusion voting and about, some of these newfangled ideas that others are trying to, ranked choice voting, which we saw in Alaska recently, trying to create some different alternatives that produce results that I guess from the voters' perspective, draw from people more in the center than the extreme. So I'd love to just handicap, give us your grades, no labels, ranked choice voting, tell us what fusion voting is. Give us a quick lesson in this.
All right, so let's lay out the landscape here. You brought up fusion voting, and fusion voting is actually not a newfangled idea at all. It's something that is deeply American and was widespread in the 19th century. And the basic idea is simple: it's that multiple parties can nominate the same candidate. So if you want to vote for Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket, you can vote for Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket. But say if we had a third common sense party that also nominated Joe Biden because he's the more moderate of the Biden versus Trump matchup, you could vote for Joe Biden on the common sense ticket. Now, what does that do? Votes aggregate to Biden, but you've signaled that what you want are the policies and priorities of this common sense party, which could be the same thing as what Holly just mentioned, could be something else, but it gives voters more power to signal what it is that they want their candidates and elected officials to stand for. And ranked choice voting is sort of the candidate version of that, where instead of parties nominating candidates who are nominated by other parties nominate their own candidates, but or independents run, but they are no longer spoilers because their votes transfer. Now, I think political parties are really the essential institutions of modern representative democracy. You can't do modern democracy without political parties. Political parties aggregate and organize elections. So I like fusion because I see it as a pro-parties reform.
Right.
See it as an opportunity to build political parties. I think just because our two parties are broken doesn't mean we should give up on the idea of political parties. The problem is we need more parties,
right,
and we need better parties, and fusion and proportional representation allow us to do that. I think in terms of running a third-party candidate in presidential elections, that is a tremendous long shot. And there has really never been a successful third-party candidacy in America. The Electoral College is a winner-take-all system on top of a winner-take-all system. So with all due respect, Holly, it seems like running a third-party candidate in this presidential election is a incredibly unlikely winning strategy.
Well, lucky for us, we're not running a third-party candidate. We are running, the idea is if we get to the spring of 2024 and the American people are still pretty clear in what they're telling us right now, which is they do not want a repeat of 2020, the idea is potentially to have a unity ticket, a Democrat and a Republican running together. But I agree with Lee that the parties are basically here to stay. But they do need to modernize. They do need to start to address, Americans where they're at.
So that's part of your goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Is to put pressure on them.
It's less really, I think, about additional parties. And I heard Catherine Gill say this, so I've got to give her credit.
Right.
It's about the threat of another party, And I think that the voters who, by the way, it's as hard as this is for me to kind of embrace, I try not to use the word centrist, because really it's about the politics of problem solving. And if you are committed to problem solving, no matter where you are on the spectrum, you're welcome at our table. And that's what the American people want. They really don't care about the latest machinations in Washington, and I invite Lee to come with us and get out around the country.
Is that what No Labels is trying to do? Are you trying to roll a bowling ball through the fragility of both parties right now?
Yes. I mean, both parties have shown us time and time again, just as you say, Donald Trump redefined the Republican Party with 10 people, half of whom he was related to.
Right.
Okay. Bernie Sanders, who's not even a Democrat, basically took over the Democratic Party. The Green New Deal, Build Back Better, those are his defining ideas. And if you walk down the street, people understand the Green New Deal is affiliated with the Democratic Party. So we want the same attention and the same, ideas addressed to those of us who believe that the priorities of the country should always come first. above the party.
Lee, I mean, I want to ask you a bit about money real quick. I guess last election cycle, $14.4 billion. I mean, that is a huge amount of money. I had no idea that the political spending had reached that level. I mean, when I heard that, that explained to me why this is such a great business for political parties to be in, number one, and how it's so hard to disrupt it. Is part of what's cementing this two-party doom loop the amount of money that's involved?
I don't think so. What's cementing the two-party system is the fact that both parties have an opposition on monopoly because of the single winner elections. Look, there's a lot of money that is going not necessarily the parties. What are the parties? It's going to consultants. Now, those consultants are affiliated with the two parties, but a lot of consultants and campaign operations could work for other parties if there were more parties, right? I mean, that would just be more potential clients and more potential elections. There's a lot of money chasing very few competitive elections. We have a system in which less than 10% of congressional elections are contested, maybe 15% of Senate elections are contested. There's a handful of swing states and then a bunch of local elections. So there's all this money chasing very few outcomes. A lot of it is frankly just wasted. So I think the two-party system is in many ways ripe for disruption and opening up. I think the problem and the reason why we're so dissatisfied with the two parties is because America is a much more diverse country, and the two parties are trying to manage these fractious coalitions. And there's only one way that they can really manage these fractious coalitions, which is to demonize the other side, which is to say, if you might not love the Democrats, but Trump is destroying democracy. You might not love the Republicans, but Democrats want to impose the woke New Deal on you, and the Republicans are your only alternative. So the very fact that we have a two-party system is the thing that is dividing our country and leading us to really hate each other, because these two parties are fractious coalitions that are only bound together by the fact that so many people within those coalitions really dislike the other side. So I think the fundamental problem is the two-party system. It's not about getting the two parties to serve the American people better, because
let's try that. How about we try that first? But listen, I have tremendous respect for anybody who spends their time and energy trying to, put us on a different path. But one of the problems with all of the attention on the reforms is that it only focuses on campaigns and elections, right? And that's like putting all your energy and attention on the wedding. The marriage is where all the action is. The marriage is where either, the values are advanced or not. And the problem is that you could rank choice vote or, fusion vote your way to whatever, but you get here and the parties still control a lot of what happens.
Well, that's why we ought to have more parties. Because, the parties have to control. Parties organize politics. You need parties to organize and structure politics. The problem is when you have two parties that are competing for narrow majorities, they don't want to work together. The fundamental reason that Washington is so broken is because both parties are trying to eke out these narrow majorities.
I just don't think that's true, because if you look at what happened in the last Congress, the record historic number of bipartisan bills that were very significant for this country passed, largely because we helped define the market of voters who supported them.
They passed because Democrats had a majority and a few Republicans went along on all of these important bills.
No, that's not.
Well, let me just ask you, just in the last couple of minutes we have, Holly, a lot of people have flooded me with research and position papers that if No Labels were to run a candidate like Joe Manchin, all that's going to do is get Donald Trump elected, and that you are the Biden-killing organization. That is that is the dinner topic du jour around town right now, and that is the concern there. I know, on the other hand, that as you talk about what No Labels is trying to do to reach these many disaffected voters, really approximately 80 million people, as you said, who are not engaged in the political system. I'm just interested in how you respond to the issue about you're going to basically be a Trojan horse for Republican interests to take down
Well,
Joe
it's funny
Biden.
if you Republican folks say the same thing to us, but on the opposite side. And listen,
They think you'll take down Donald Trump.
Yes, exactly. Very concerned about that in some key states that we would be quite powerful in.
Right.
But here's the thing: No Labels isn't. We're not manifesting this. We're not creating this. We're giving voice to it.
Right.
Right. And all the political establishment has to do here in Washington is speak to the common interest of the common sense majority voters, right? That's all they got to do. They just really have to stop pitting us against each other, stop scaring us about, the terrible things that will befall the country should they lose power, and govern with a vision. So, competing is an American tradition. It's an American value. They can both compete for our votes, and then if there's not a clear lane, then we won't advance a unity ticket. It's not that complicated.
Lee, I really enjoyed your book, and I think it's so important for people to pay attention to this because you make something that feels true to me, that the legitimacy, the solvency of the system is eroding and seems to be dying. And you're looking at ways to revive it. If you were to play the Lee Drutman playbook of the 2 or 3 most important things, if you had the power, you would shift to get people to believe in the election system again, what would you do?
Well, I would move to a system of proportional representation for the House, multi-member districts through, and give people real diversity of choices. America is a very diverse and pluralistic country in which people have lots of different values, lots of different life experiences, lots of different hopes. And we want a Congress that looks like this country, in terms of ideology, in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of race, and can give everybody a voice to hash out those disagreements. I think that would be a tremendous way to really realize the promise of representative democracy in America. I think we got to move beyond this artificial us versus them, this artificial my team versus your team. The only way that we can win is for you to lose. And that's what the two-party system is doing to us. That is fundamentally splitting us into 2 warring camps based on these artificial distinctions. Now, there are some real disagreements. And I think my disagreement with Holly here is that the political center right now is somewhat small. There are a lot of people who are unhappy with the 2-party system, but not a lot of them are political centrists. They're kind of all over the ideological map. And moderation and centrism is something, it's a system level property that emerges from diversity of representation and nobody having dominant power.
I love this conversation. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Lee Drutman, Senior Fellow at the New American Foundation, and Holly Page, co-founder of No Labels. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? The big 2 parties always argue that the alternative to them is chaos, and they've convinced the public that resistance is futile. These 2 parties are comfy in the system they've created. They love predictability, and they hate surprises. They groom their leaders over time, they raise tons of money, and control the whole chain from top to bottom. And if they don't win a race, who cares? They'll get another chance in a couple of years. That's literally the system America has, and it's structurally corrupt. There's just no other way to describe it. Good ideas only happen in this country if they come through the 2 political parties, and are absolutely crushed if they don't. But the lack of innovation in a system that only allows 2 choices is destined to break down someday, somehow. Maybe the race between one candidate who's accused of federal crimes and another who's the oldest candidate in American history, well, this might just be the time when a 3rd choice sounds like a great idea. And that's the bottom line.